Hello.
Hey.
I will not make the same mistake twice.
Well, people don't know what you're talking about, so they will probably never do. It's the 6th episode of Biweekly Season 2, and here we are. I'm Slava.
And I'm Dima. And I guess this is episode with my topic, but before that, I wanted to start bringing follow-up back into our discussions. And first real bit of follow-up would be for me to ask about your Aspen experience that you went through recently. I think our listeners may know about that. How was it?
It was something that I really needed, and it was perfectly timed. I think that after coming back, I can say that my theme of fall of relief is successfully over because I feel relieved as much as it can be according to the circumstances. I think that the overall level of impressions and emotional conditions that I've experienced is very equal to 2019 when I first ended up at Aspen. But it's totally different. Different group, different texts, different context, different creative task. Everything is very different. But I'm super happy. I got there and I strongly recommend Aspen seminars to people around, especially offline, especially full-time for a week. That's something that I can't even imagine that could recalibrate your mind better.
I guess that's a full immersion experience that I missed on my online seminar. So, but I want to echo every word of what you said. It's a very transformational experience, and I believe that offline, that is when people gather together in one physical location and disconnect from the internet and the rest of the world, it probably is even more transformational than what I went through.
It also happened that exactly in the middle of the seminar, the seasons switched. It was autumn, these golden leaves, red colors, beautiful sunsets. And then just one day it clicked, started snowing. And for the rest of the seminar, it was just snowy, white, amazingly beautiful as well, but very different.
So you were lucky that way. The transformational experience both ways.
It was a transition, definitely, into something new. So welcome to the new theme, the year of deceleration. And it's been going quite successful as well, but I have more to talk about it sometime later.
Maybe our listeners can expect that one of the episodes would be fully devoted to themes and stuff like that.
But this one is about decision making and the traditional question, why is that?
Right. So the decision-making methods I kind of called the topic of this episode, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is that I have a sense that, in professional world, in professional setting, we are sort of not allowed or do not allow ourselves to make decisions by gut feeling. Whenever we make a decision, it has to be a rational decision that kind of follows some sort of method to kind of justify that whatever we decide is the right thing for us to do. And first, before we dive into discussing why that is and what to do about this and what are the pitfalls of that, I wanted to validate with you if that's also something that you observed, or maybe I'm exaggerating as I often do with things like that.
Well, I'd put it this way. It's probably better to try to rationalize decisions already made. You could potentially make decisions based on your gut feelings or intuition, but when you have to communicate them to others and you would like people to follow, just explaining that it feels right is probably not the best way to engage people into something. But I think that intuitive decision-making is a thing. It's somewhere there, and many people use it, but they probably just don't speak about it out loud.
Well, that's interesting because that's exactly one of the topics I wanted to discuss that in this broader area, rationalization of the decisions and then persuading others to follow them. But then I hope I kind of take it that you kind of agree that this is might be an interesting topic to discuss. But anyway, it will be too late to change horses, right?
Yeah, let's go into it.
Once we started recording. And I guess to build a little bit on that with those structured decision-making techniques, and we will talk about definitions in a moment. I think it often comes, at least from my observations in business-like settings, those decisions are often framed as a choice decision. So we have option A of doing something, option B, C, and D, and whatever, and then we kind of supposedly choose the best option out of them. And most of the structured decision-making methods that I've seen, they revolve around that idea. Does that sound fair to you? Or maybe have you seen other methods of decision-making used often or widely?
I would say in most of the cases, you're right. I would probably expand these metrics into 2 more areas. So apart from prioritizing and choosing, there would probably be decision-making methods that are about analyzing deeper and looking into different levels of situation, context, issue, problem, whatever, even before you have the options. So some decision-making models, they start with analysis, and they might even not come to a solution because sometimes analysis is sufficient to get something done. And then the other type would be something related to brainstorming, when you have to generate a number of options, not just choose between them, but to come up with them. And it's usually like it ends up with priorities and choice, but the way you get there could be quite different.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, and I guess my thinking here and the frame where I coming from this would be about that last part of the process where we do like evaluate different options. But we will probably get into the territory of how we generate those options and why do we generate them in the first place. But I guess that's what I had in mind when we are choosing between different options to call that final thing a decision on a problem.
Fair enough.
And I had a bit of a conundrum researching this topic because I had this. It happens to me. I had this strong feeling that I read or heard about some sort of quote unquote official term for what I've been using already as a structured decision making kind of thing. I was looking throughout the internet and I could not find the thing that could have sparked this feeling in me previously. But I'm fairly certain still to this day that in my early career, there was, I even like almost visualize a slide where it says like, this is usual decision making when someone sits and thinks and spits out a decision. And then there is supposedly structured decision making when you follow a process to evaluate alternatives and find it. But I guess for the purposes of this discussion, we will define structured decision making as a process where we define options and define criteria for evaluating those options. Then we evaluate each option against the criteria, and by some sort of prioritization, we arrive at one single option, which we then call a decision for the problem at hand.
Is your definition tackling an area of a problem itself? Like, would you go into digging into the issue, root cause analysis and stuff? Or we assume that this has been done and you understand the issue as good as you can, as well as you can?
I guess given what I have in mind, I would probably include the generation of options as well, without like the step of generating options, without maybe digging too much into the particular method of how we generate those options. So the analysis would be part of it, but maybe as a black box in this process.
All right, so we can just like leave it out for this discussion and say that we have analyzed something, we have come up with some sort of solutions, and now it's time to choose.
some sort of set of potential solutions, and then we are kind of choosing one of them.
All right, that's a fair frame.
Okay, so then I did this section materials, but with links to articles, maybe for people and for maybe for us to look a bit deeper. Like very traditional thing is the decision making matrix kind of thing, right? When it's also described in Untools, the link will be in the show notes. The idea is super straightforward, right? We have different options. We define the criteria. For each of the criteria, we define numerical kind of gauge for how well each particular option fits given criteria. Then do we add them or multiply? Well, depending on your preference, I guess. You can either add or multiply scores for different criterias for a particular option, and then choose an option with the highest resulting value.
And generally, I think that that's a valid tool, and it could be used in multiple cases. The only exception I can think of is something related. I think Cortex is one of the most quoted shows that we ever do on Biweekly, but this time it will be about one of the hosts of Cortex. It's CGP Grey. He has posted a YouTube video about the fog of the future and how hard it is to make decisions. It was in the context of COVID pandemics, but the overall idea was that when you use such things in some really essential choices, it's kind of hard because let's say now we know something about COVID and we are experienced, we are vaccinated, we feel very different than we felt in 2020 when it was the first lockdown. And back there, if you use such a tool, like, should I leave my home? There are 20 advantages and each of them, let's say, can be scored from 10 to 100. And then there is one disadvantage, the risk of death. And the score there is like quadrillion. And this method kind of dies because whenever there is something really important on the line or a huge risk there, it's really hard to evaluate. When it's something casual, like, like I might lose $500, but I might get this and it might take this time. And it's part of the rational thing. But when it comes to some fears and huge risks and big stakes, I think it's kind of fallen out.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's the biggest challenge and problem with this method is it's very sensitive to how you define the criteria and how you measure each of them. Because it's in a sense it's kind of similar to the 5 whys method, right? Where in 5 whys the outcome is largely limited by the knowledge you already have about the problem, and here is the same thing. And it also, like you mentioned, it can break when one of the criteria has vastly different scale than anything else, like risk of death. And also another example that I wanted to bring to the table here would be when you have options which are relatively close, which are like kind of good enough, and you will get supposedly outcome scores of that would be very, very close. And what I've seen people often do, in order to break tie between those options, they will start add new superfluous criteria which do not matter much to bring them further apart and then be able to choose one. Yep, kind of works. And I wonder, continuing this thread of materials and different methods, I wonder if you've heard of traffic lights variation of the same kind of thing.
I've never heard of it, but I've read about it in the article you attached. But I think it would be nice if you share, because many listeners probably are not aware of what it is.
Right. This is something that I came to relatively recently. I didn't see this much in the wild long time ago. So to me, this is more of a recent thing. The idea with traffic lights decision making is similar to decision metrics. We also define options. We also define criteria for which we evaluate the options, but the scale of evaluation and the method evaluation is different. So we limit ourselves to just 3 traffic lights. So like if there's an option and there is, I guess, risk of death, it would be as one of the criteria, it would be measured as high, medium, or low, which is some like depending on the criteria, that would be like green light, yellow light, or red light. Red meaning that this is bad. And then when we evaluate each of the options through this gauge, we assign a color to each of the kind of boxes that represent that matrix, and then we use visual kind of evaluation. The more greens we have, the better. The more reds we have, the worse. And choose an option that way, which supposedly gets away from these challenges that we discussed with need for super precise numerical definition for each of the criteria, and those criteria being on a different scale. And it's visual, and it's like the slides with traffic light decision making look kind of pretty.
Let's try getting into an example how you would apply this into like on a case. Let's say I have an employee. Let's name this employee Bob. And Bob hasn't been performing well lately for some reasons. And I have 3 options. I could talk to Bob, I could ignore Bob, or I could fire Bob. And ignoring Bob is not an option because Dima would say that, well, good managers don't ignore the issues. You have to face this gray Rhino? Yeah. What was this economic?
Rhino. Right. Yeah.
Rhino. Yeah.
Rhino. I would call them rhinos.
Well, you have to confront this thing. So then it leaves us with just 2 options. Either we have to talk and try to change something, or we just have to say goodbye and hire someone else, or just redistribute the duties. The issue is that when I use this method, I could list, 25 ideas why it's good to talk, 10 ideas why it's probably a bad thing to start digging into this issue. What are the risks? And let's say there are 10 good things in firing Bob and 25 bad potential risks there. And I can see all these reds and greens and reds and greens, but there is one point specifically that concerns me the most, that Bob is kind of a bottleneck, like is a holder of specific knowledge that only Bob has, and it takes really a while to pass this knowledge to someone else. Like it would take half a year to transition to move away from this. And technically, I have all these like pluses and minuses, greens, yellows, and reds, but one of them is still psychologically really, really important. And I believe that the traffic light system doesn't give the value to the light. It just highlights the importance. Yeah, that's important, but it could be much more important than 5 greens on the other side.
Right. And that's, I think, a very valid criticism for this method. And I think this is where, in defense, I would say that its overall is less precise than the decision matrix that we just defined. So here, I think it would be acceptable to kind of give one of the criteria just higher preference, and saying something like any solution that has red on this criteria would not be acceptable at all. So maybe, but I agree that when one thing dominates the rest of the discussion, probably this method should not be used, right? If it
and that's the point, like, because technically structural decision making is there to help you rationalize and analyze things and make things more rational. But most of these things are based on emotions. It's a fear, it's anxiety, it's some sort of, shame, maybe. Usually these factors are powered by a strong emotion. Like, for instance, I'm afraid that my product will fall apart without Bob. It could be rational, it could be irrational, because, then as practice shows, whenever the person leaves, it turns out that it's not really such a bottleneck, and this knowledge could be actually already distributed. I just never knew about that. Practice shows that whenever a team member leaves, most products do survive and most teams do move on and
Right.
start working there. And it's usually a psychological or emotional attachment to a person, to this person's role, to relationships, to some other areas. And it could be a toxic relationship that actually irritates you a lot. That's why you come to this option of firing Bob at the first place.
Right. Well, I guess the way how I would see this method working in this case would be one additional thing that I probably did not mention, but the way I saw this method used was that, like, typically that would be done in a spreadsheet, right? Because that's like we do things in spreadsheet, and it's easy to color different cells in the spreadsheet to form that traffic light. I think the way I saw this method used is that the cell is colored green, yellow, or red, but that then in the cell someone needs to put an answer to a question why it is red, why it is yellow, why it is green, and it then helps other people to maybe challenge those assessments. So like in this case, if I have huge personal or emotional attachment to Bob because he was there from day one on this product, he is the bearer of the divine knowledge about this product, and I might be super scared about Bob leaving, and I would put this red, like risk of product failing because we lost some critical knowledge about the product. I would put it as red. Then I would expect someone to, when we discuss this, because I guess in the business setting, it also something that happens with decisions. We discuss them, right? We rarely make them on our own. We would discuss this decision, and someone would challenge me and say that, why exactly do you think the risk would be high? And walking through that, we can maybe reduce this to yellow, which will change the overall outcome.
I'm kind of stuck at the idea that we discuss everything, because I believe that we don't. And we do discuss some things, especially ones that are basically responsibility of like an entire group or related to the entire group. Let's say a major technological change or an important hire. Like I could see how this is a group decision. However, I think it's usually manager's choice whether to fire someone or not. And quite rarely team actually gets super engaged. They can give their feedback. They could suggest some, potential ways out or alternatives or solutions to an issue. But usually it's manager's call whether the person stays or leaves.
Right. But maybe I got a sense, I do agree with you that there are those decisions. I guess the reason why I brought group here was that maybe in setting like this, I would kind of expect that if Bob is such a critical employee, there would be more than his manager who would be sensitive to this situation. Like if we see a risk of product failing, maybe our marketing or sales teams might be interested in that, and we can kind of bring them. And they may, since Bob was there from day one, they or may know about Bob anyways and can be surprised to see him leave and stuff like that. So we would bring them into the conversation.
What I feel tricky about is that actually a manager really needs some facilitation skills to have this discussion organized, because I've seen so many meetings where people come up with very different solutions and very different opinions about saying Bob. And the manager leaves the meeting with even more confusion, because apart from the conflict that one had before the meeting, there are even more points and more risks and more fears. Let's say Bob is actually a manipulator and he got into some really tricky, toxic relations with a number of people, not just the manager. And it complicates the thing because people don't judge rationally or don't evaluate him. And if there is no clear procedure of performance review or some exit protocol or offboarding settings, and people still do it like on humane level, it might actually complicate things. Let's even imagine a simpler case, not firing someone, but choosing a technological stack. When a tech lead knows the best solution, and I think we've discussed this some time ago in the expert episode, and then people come with some of their ideas and try to influence this decision by suggesting something that is just out of place, and this discussion just takes up time and resources and energy of all the members. And if there is no procedure, like how do we actually make this decision? Whose call is that? It can turn into a debate that will last forever, and like, hello to the United Nations Organization and the Security Council and all the other forever debating institutions there.
But that is actually a great point that you're bringing, right? The separation of the decision-making, quote-unquote, process from decision-making authority, and like who's there to make the final call. And I think that's a good question, but also I think that one does not preclude the other. If, let's say, I'm a tech lead and I have full decision authority on like technological stack for the future project, I still would probably choose to employ one of this method to maybe communicate my decision better. And like, even if people disagree with me, right? It's since the authority for making the decision lies with me, I am to make that call, but I may use this method to maybe solicit additional inputs or feedback for that decision to maybe reinforce it, or maybe to reevaluate or reapproach it, but also to communicate the decision-making process to the rest of the team.
I think these are two different scenarios that you're talking right now, because when you would like to actually get some more input and you're doubtful about the decision, then the discussion is in order. Like, I can understand why you would get more opinions on that, why you would think of alternatives. But when you know that you would like this to be done, and then you initiate a discussion, but you're not really ready to choose something else because you know that this is an optimal option, and you don't really want to waste your team's time, especially if somebody strongly disagrees. Yeah, and it's not just a civil talk, but somebody really cares about an alternative option. And we know that it's your authority to make a call, and you decide actually at the end of the day what will be done. And then you just engage this person into a conversation, probably get some feedback that is very different from your position, and still say like, yeah, no, thank you for your opinions. Like, I really appreciate our talk, but we're doing this anyway. And that could be discouraging for both the manager and the person who was trying to get into this debate and lost.
So let's explore that deeper, because I feel like I disagree with you a little bit there. And I guess I agree on the point that depending on the situation and stage of the decision making, bringing in the discussion might not be the best or the most productive thing. But I still see a scenario where even if I'm making that decision, I need to kind of sell and explain that decision to other people. And I guess what is the better way to do that other than explaining the decision-making process? So I may maybe like announce that, hey, this is the technology stack for the new product. This was the decision-making process for why we arrived, or why I arrived at that particular.
But that is not the discussion. That's the presentation. It's basically your explanation of how the decision was made. It's a bit different.
Yes. I think that's the key thing.
For the presentation, absolutely. Like, but I just don't equalize those with the discussion and the group decision making. Like, I do think that a manager should really present and explain most important and crucial turns and changes and decisions and something that impacts the team. But depending on the algorithm, let's put it this way. I believe that nobody in Savvy except me can be as deep into our financial model and system as I am. Maybe some financial managers who could be invited from the outside, but inside there are no people with such competence. There are people who could monitor the activities, who could help like track the key metrics and see the numbers and do part of the job. But basically, I'm the one who is responsible for the ratio between costs and revenue and major changes, the price shifts, and there are other things, because I can see the big picture. And I could potentially initiate a debate about our business model, but I'm not sure that people are equipped for such a discussion. And just to invite them to this decision making, I would have to give them a number of books and explain how things work and communicate a number of things. And it seems like a waste of time because they're happy with the state of things. When I present some changes, they just ask questions, I answer the questions, and things go on because they know it's my responsibility. And if I fail, it's actually my fault, and it's up to me to fix things if something doesn't go right.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I would have two comments about that. First, I think we arrived at an important distinction between decision making, the process, and also the decision communication, which is also a process, but it is distinct from decision making, and both can involve groups, and most likely will involve groups, but in very different capacity and with very different dynamics, right? And both the decision metrics and the traffic light kind of thing can be used in both, but still differently, right? That was the first remark, and I think that's a great the great learning that we arrived together. And the second would be to dig deeper into this CEO and authority to make the decisions kind of thing. Would you say that even when someone has full authority to make decision, they may often choose to bring in not everyone, but at least some select people to help them validate or challenge the decision to make sure that whatever comes out is the best thing. Like CEO would bring his senior officers to discuss, to provide him feedback on the decision with full acknowledgement that it is his decision. He is going to make it, but he is just collecting more information to inform his choice.
When I think of such cases, I can see two options here. Option one is when the top manager is actually afraid of taking full responsibility and tries to share it with a number of people and creates a committee or a group or something just to spread the responsibility from the decision that should actually be taken by this person. But one is not ready. And then there you go into this, like, let's make a procedure, a committee, a decision-making protocol, and more questionnaires, etc. But sometimes the same artifacts are just the ways to research and explore. When it's an escape from making a decision and trying to pass the decision to others without actually delegating them the authority, like you ask them to take the responsibility without giving them an authority, that's kind of a game. And in such cases, I've seen a lot of fails, conflicts, discussions, unclear meetings, wasting time, unnecessary activities, and people just, voicing out some concerns and ideas, and it doesn't actually help. But when it is a part of a work group and research, but there is still clear understanding of the responsibility and the person is willing to keep this responsibility, or willing to share the authority with the group and actually say, like, guys, from this day, it's not my call, it's our call. We decide on the salaries of all top managers here. It's not my authority anymore, it's our authority. And I can't change your salary after this. Like, we will discuss it together. And that's the model that I suggest. And that's the reasons why I think so. Let's try and see how it works. If it doesn't work, in 6 months, we'll roll back to the previous decision-making mechanism. Then it's more valid, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting how, well, I want to say like simple topic like decision-making methods, which, well, by any stretch of imagination is not simple, but how many different facets to the dynamics that can take place. That there are like power relationships, like responsibilities and stuff like that, which can influence, which can give different color to a very familiar thing in a different context. And I definitely share a pain that I sense in your voice when people kind of abuse decision-making processes and methods to no end, and then it becomes a waste of everyone's time, where it would be so much simpler to like, I guess, like, we do this thing, let's go with it. I take the responsibility. Like, we do that. And maybe it can be accompanied with something like, trust me, it's going to be fine, but even without it, let's just let's do that. And I wonder if you've seen any other examples of how the decision-making process or decision-making theater can go wrong. Because I think that's very not common, but not a rare thing to see.
I'd say that about 6 years ago, maybe 5, I was looking into this holacracy thing. And it's another methodology of making decision, but without an authority itself, like when the group is the only holder of the authority and responsibility for the entire decision. And as I was looking for case studies and ideas how it might work, it's quite a unique methodology, and I really hope that in the future humanity will be ready for such an approach. I think it has quite a potential, but I've seen it failed so many times in real cases, because in this specific case, the immaturity of a single individual in a group can slow down the decision-making process like dozens of times. And instead of just agreeing on something because one person is insecure, unconfident, inexperienced, you can underline pretty much just not prepared to make a decision, as everyone else in the team, the entire team will be waiting. And I think that that's another example of how such procedure that is actually designed to bring diversity slows down the progress. What about you? Do you have any cases like that?
Yeah, I think I've seen similar examples when there is like never-ending decision-making process with new criteria brought in, like reevaluating all the evaluations for all the criteria, and it just never ends. And it also kind of bugs me to no end, because in this case, the cost of making a decision can outweigh the cost of making bad decision in the first place. In many cases, it's just, let's do it one way. It doesn't work. Let's do it another way. And it can be faster and cheaper and more cost effective than trying to arrive at the perfect decision from the first time. Another thing I've seen being as a problem was that when we evaluate different solutions without first showing that those options are indeed the solutions to the problem that we have. Some of them, like, options are presented, but if you look deeper, some of them should not even be contenders because they miss certain requirements or do not fit certain constraints that we have. That, of course, that would be an outlandish example if, like, I need to evaluating of different options to get, let's say, to New York. I was thinking, I can buy an airline, and then I can use my own airline to fly to fly there. Yeah, is it an option? Yes. Is it practical? No, by any stretch of imagination. But I've seen maybe definitely not these outlandish of examples, but something like that when, again, time is wasted discussing an option which is not really an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And according to your first point, I just yesterday was listening to a speech of, I think it was chart director of Luxoft, quite a global outsourcing corporation. And one of the ideas that, pretty much the only idea that I got from that speech, that sometimes in risk management, it's cheaper to let things happen than to calculate and mitigate the risk. Let's put it this way. If you're hiring, let's say, a COO, it might be cheaper to just give this person a probation month than to interview for a year with a group of top managers, and just purely their time on the meetings and decision-making and discussions and interviews could actually cost you more than trying 6 people just picked by an experienced HR or hiring 6 people simultaneously and giving them some kind of probation. But the mechanism is so outdated that it actually wastes energy, time, and the cost-benefit analysis just cries there.
Same. Well, that definitely resonates with me, because in my world, in a technical world, that can also be a thing where we can just try one method of solving a problem, and if it works, then that's great. If it doesn't, we can try another one with not too much cost overall. It doesn't work in every case, of course, but in quite a lot of cases, this approach can yield a better result faster than super rigid decision-making process.
There was one case in my practice. We were doing one of our first tries in consulting, and we didn't have much experience. So I can totally buy why people wanted to check how we can handle this issue.
Mm-hmm.
But when I realized that, let's say we were suggesting a service that would cost $2,000, and the risk of failure would be $2,000 plus manager's time for supporting this initiative. So let's say $3,000. Right. It was not a huge thing. Let's say it's part of individual plan process. Like we would research, suggest something, try it, and roll it out. If it doesn't work, cut it, 3,000. But the idea there was that in order to launch it, we had to do so much time with and so many activities with lawyers, CEO, top managers, stakeholders. I've calculated 12 meetings with some preparation, work, extra questions, emails, and stuff. And I believe that if I can calculate roughly the time that this company spent for making this decision, they could actually make just hire 3 different contractors with about the same costs, and just then pick the best option that works for them.
Right. Remember that reminds me of there was a service of something like service. It can be a simple web page where you can put the number of attendees on the meeting together with their salaries and calculate the cost of a single meeting. I think I also been in similar situations where we have 5, 6, 8 people here discussing this for the even for the time we spend on the meeting. We could do this thing 2 times over or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think one of another interesting aspects in decision making is somehow related to setting goals, because whenever I see people who especially discuss the growth, let's say the sales plan,
right,
and in so many cases the decision how much growth they should include for the next year is based on motivation and fearlessness of a single person who is suggesting this idea. And then everyone else is like, I don't know, 40% next year plus. Doesn't sound very comfortable to me.
Well, I guess this can also be an example of asymmetric kind of dynamics, because someone can get credit for setting aggressive goal for the next time, like C-level executive or higher up manager. But since they're not really, well, they may be responsible, but maybe not fully for achieving that goal. And in the end of the year, the not hitting that goal can be blamed on markets or individual sales team. This create a bit of asymmetry that can.
And that's what I can actually see right now, because people tend to blame people who just suggested something or chose something, because let's say on paper, the strategic setting and strategic goals should be somehow based on analytics.
Right.
What sort of analytics could explain to you the tendency on the market that is facing COVID pandemics, military conflict on the territory of your country, multiplied by the global economic recession? Where is the expert who can actually come and say, well, your B2B Ukrainian educational business will probably work on this scale, or that's the curve that is going to happen on the markets in the next 6 months? No one can actually predict such things. And in such decisions, when you actually have to name something, you have to look into the future and visualize how many clients you'll get, or what would be the revenue, or how your team will grow, or what the budget is going to be in the next 12 months. And there is an actual procedure when managers are responsible of putting a number in December for how much money their team would need for the next 12 months, which is scary. And I think that this part of decision making is frustrating, and it cannot possibly be based on data. Like, there is no way you can predict things here.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's one of the pitfalls of methods like this, where they give an illusion of, or less, of determinism, or of knowing things, or knowing consequences to different things, where we might not. And then sometimes I also, and to be honest, I guess I've done that myself a couple of times, when like you have an option and you have to evaluate against a criteria, and you honestly don't know, like, there is, and you maybe even think that there is no way of actually or accurately evaluating those things, but because of pressure and whatnot, like, maybe this is 4 and this is 2. Like, this sounds about right. This is worse by two notches of this gauge. Like, but then the other person looks at this, they see precise number and they take it for granted, which probably they shouldn't. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another idea I wanted to explore here with all this decision-making charade was these methods, they are supposedly kind of geared towards finding the best solution out of, like, even if we're choosing from different options, we want to choose the best option. And I wonder, like, do we always need to choose the best option? Because I feel like in many situations there is a place for, like, good enough option. We don't need to necessarily shoot for the best. Whatever solves the problem, like the closest the gap that we have, can be probably like good enough, and we can go with that without going a whole 9 yards of evaluating committees and metrics and calculations and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I think that's just a casual daily decisions that we take. I can give you an example. My company has been using the CRM system Bittrex, and it's initially designed by Russian engineers. So ideologically, we've decided to switch, and pretty much any other CRM system would fit our criteria. Like we use pretty simple way of just keeping the documentation on most clients, and our database is 50 companies, and we keep very basic info about the clients there. So we just look at the costs. It's not extra high. So like, yeah, let's go for this. And we don't need to run like deep research into 16 CRM systems and make a group, because people will learn to use pretty much anything. Most IT products in CRM business are very similar visually. It's just basically an Excel, but with a different UI. And there's not much there. So a solution is absolutely fine in such cases. And it's not a game changer. It's not something that would actually make huge impact on our business or change something. If it becomes one, then probably people will just change the criteria. If the criteria is very simple, like SCRM.
Yep. And I also think that we kind of underestimate maybe sometimes power of this good enough, where we can save a lot of time, but just buying a thing or getting a thing as opposed to getting supposedly the best thing under the sun.
I think that what people quite often confuse here is that they try to be, again, quite futuristic about things. Like, how long are we going to use it? Like, will this CRM last for the next 12 years of our business? I don't know. And you don't know. It works now. It probably will work in a year. It seems that the functionality is enough, but like, who knows what's going to happen? And in such cases, it's really hard to prioritize. Let's say you have a solution that is cheap and effective today, but will get more expensive. Let's say like Slack. You get into Slack. Slack costs, I don't know, $7 or something along those lines per user. And your team is 20 people.
Right.
You buy this solution now because it's fancy, it has the functionality, it does a lot of things, lots of integrations, lots of fun. It's an industry standard and a number of reasons. And the cost of this thing is $120 a month, which is acceptable. 5 years later, when your company is 150 people, this thing kind of gets more expensive. And maybe you start thinking, the criteria changes here.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with this. The future proofing of the solutions is often the way how things get very dire in the decision making department, because like we cannot see the future, the fog of future that we already mentioned, and trying to make any maybe unsubstantiated projections about that would be very difficult and often can be just a waste of time and just guesswork, right? If you guess right, then yes, you can pat yourself on the back. But if you guess wrong, then you just wasted whole bunch of time today on that.
I can actually expand this example with Slack. I think it was 2 years ago or something when we realized that our team grew up as much that we shouldn't be using the free version of Slack. And the paid version was quite expensive for us because we are not an IT company and that's not our level. But the issue was that the history was disappearing for the free version. Like you can keep just 10,000 messages there for free. And then the more people text there, the shorter the history gets. And like at a certain point, we got into like 3 weeks. Like you can see messages 3 weeks old and then nothing else, which is not fun. And at some points, you would like to find some follow-ups or agreements or decisions or things that have been made. We tried to build some ways around, like Google Docs or stuff to fix the decisions, but still, like you would like to see your chat history.
Yeah, of course.
I thought, all right, that's fair. Let's probably switch to a different messenger. And here we are. All the other options are tricky because we don't have a huge budget for that. We can't really afford paid Slack or another alternative there. There is Telegram. Cheap, relatively accessible, zero functionality, like totally impossible to organize anything similar to Slack in terms of groups, threads, and stuff, like totally different user experience. And Rocket Chat, which is an open source solution, I believe, and we could just push it on our server and use it. And their monetization system is for the number of push notifications. So you can keep as many messengers, as many users you'd like. You'll have the history, but the number of push notifications is limited to, I don't know, let's say 20,000 a month. And I have no idea how many push notifications my team is using at this stage. So it is free. It does have the functionality. It does have the history. And it basically fixes all my issues. But 2 years ago, it seemed like a good call. Right now, when on the 20th day of the month, we just run out of push notifications. And it's still kind of expensive because the team actually grew up even more and the cost is about as equal as Slack. I think that the next product will be just the same. Like we'll just not be able to foresee what the next trouble or obstacle we'll be facing in 2 more years if we change from Rocket to something else.
Yeah, that's. I think that engineers who try to estimate the cost of AWS services for a project can definitely relate to this story with push notifications. Sure. Yep. That's a great story. Great point. I think maybe last thing I wanted to explore in this context would be like we established that there are some situations where the decision making process can get into an unproductive territory, right? When we discuss things that do not make much sense discussing them, right? And if you notice something like that, how would you navigate out of that situation? If someone embarked on this structured decision making for a particular thing, which does not really deserve to be structurally decision made, and we can just go with like whatever is good enough option, or whatever is not critically bad option, and just let's run with that and then maybe fix later. How do you try to get out of this? Because I have a sense that once people already got this analytical decision making in their mindset about the problem, it's very difficult to get them out of that, because anything else would seem of a lesser quality in terms of the decision that is coming out.
Well, that's a tricky question, because I think if we speak about my personal participation, one of the saviors here is the culture of meetings. Like if there is a clear agenda in the invitation and you can see the goal, you can see the agenda, you can predict that you are not going to be useful, or this is not the topic that you should actually invest 1 hour of time into, then you could communicate it directly to the organizers and like, well, good luck there. I'm sure you'll make the right call. I don't think I should spend 1 hour discussing the color of the next offer that we are going to use, or the presentation template that we are about to employ. Like that, you're professionals. Just do your job. I trust you. Good luck, guys. In some cases, when I understand that the person needs support there, and there is a lot of hesitation and doubt, then maybe it's not about the decision itself, but supporting the manager as a retention mechanism. So to keep someone motivated and give some credit and share your thoughts, even if it's not as valuable in terms of the decision itself. But let's say the person is panicking for some different reasons and using or implying this model, and such things just calm this person down, then maybe it's actually worth doing it, not in terms of choosing the template, but supporting the manager and then saving time on hiring a new one when this one burns out. So if I see such implications, I could invest into counterproductive activity just to participate and support and help. So I think it does depend on the context. And what do you do in such cases?
Well, I think I probably would try to do similar to what you described, like understand what exactly is going on. Is it about the decision, or maybe there is some other dynamic at play which kind of calls for this kind of process? But if it's truly about we just given too much attention or too much thought to this particular decision, we can do it later. I think the method I tend to use would be to wrap up the current discussion as quickly as possible, just to prevent further waste of time, and then reframe, like ding, like talking about framing, like for the next discussion, reframe this maybe as not a discussion of choosing one of the options, doing the structured decision making, but have someone prepare a more detailed proposal for just one. This is a solution for that, and then frame the discussion around, would you be against that? And if no one has any strong feelings about that, and they say, that probably should work, we can go with that. So I try to maybe move it out of territory of choosing between options into a territory of approving one good enough option and confirming that people don't have any red flags about a particular thing. It does not always work. It's not always easy, but sometimes I had success with this kind of thing.
I think one of my colleagues names such meetings as supervision meetings, when you just supervise on the decision. Like that's what I did. That's where the options. That's what I chose. Does it seem solid and rational to you? Like, is it a good thing to do from your perspective? And I've also heard such a term as validation of a decision. So we meet to validate a decision, to check if it's to make a sanity check to whether something will work.
That's a good word. Yep. Instead of choosing the decision, do a sanity check on a sort of a proposal. Cool. Good stuff. Good stuff. I think that's all I have on this topic. Do you have any last minute maybe words of wisdom or anything that we should have touched but we didn't?
I'll just ask you a few more questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
If you come up with, I don't know, a difficult creative choice, let's say that your photo project and you have a number of pictures that you can choose, and you would have to submit one to an exhibition or to somewhere, I don't know, auction.
Right. Yep.
And the way I know something about you, picking such things can be challenging because there are so many criteria and there are so many pros and cons for each of the options that the variety of such things can be just mind-blowing. What actually helps you to focus when you have, like, I don't know, a huge photo base of 1 terabyte of amazing photos and you would have to pick one to submit for a contest?
Well, in this particular context, and it is a tricky question in this context, I guess I would try to do 2 things, or to think about 2 things here. And I already forgot about one of them. One would be that, again, like, try to focus on good enough, right? People who are going to see my pictures in that context, contest or whatever it is, do not have a benefit or the curse of seeing all 100,000s of other pictures that I have. So they will not judge that the picture that I submit as being the best picture of those 11,000 or whatnot. It just needs to be good, solid picture that people can like. So I would try to employ this thinking to kind of get out of paralysis by analysis, and trying to find the very, 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 very best picture. Just start finding good enough things. And also one thing that was the first thing, and the second thing, which kind of often helps me get out of this situation, is some sort of time boxing with contest or auction. There would be naturally some sort of time boxing, but even if
choosing
there
a picture
were
for a
not
week, that sounds like something mind blowing.
No, but saying maybe not for a week, but saying that, hey, I have to have a picture chosen by Monday or by end of weekend or something like that. And this again forces, this would be to force at least me out of trying to find the very best one. Just try to find solid, good enough.
All right. And then there is a follow-up question. It's actually related to these good enough things, because quite often when we say good enough, something is actually not good enough. It's just usually the substitution for, oh, I'm too tired to make this decision, let's just pick something random, or I just don't have the ways to explain why I disagree, so this one will work. And you basically compromise in such cases. You compromise for something, I don't know, a solution, a practice, technology, and then you have to face it for the next 6 months. And at a certain point, your frustration and anger and irritation with this decision keeps growing. And do you have some kind of a trigger or understanding when something stops being good enough? Like, it was good enough on Monday, but then a week later, I've realized that it's actually not performing. And what is this grade of uncomfortable state and feeling that will push you to reconsider the decision?
That's a great question. I think that the technique I'm using, not precisely in this situation, but in other situations as well, but also for this kind of scenario where things start trickling in and then they can cross a threshold at some point. I think I use the power, the rule or the method of 3. So that when things happen once, I just I note it, but do not do anything. I discard it as just an accident. And when the thing happens the second time, I take a closer look at this, like, hey, why did it happen? Maybe do something small about this, but not something big. But when something happens the third time, this would be the time that when I will start thinking seriously about, like, what's going on, what needs to be changed. So I use this in the context, like, to decide whether to automate certain thing. If I did it once, I'll do it manually. When I do it like twice, I'll do it manually again, but I will document the steps. When I do it third time, I would think, all right, let's consider automating this thing. And similar with the decision. So if something happened that rings a bell that, hey, maybe that decision is now outdated or not as effective. Let's put a note to that. But then when it happens like 3 times, I would start reconsidering that.
That's quite interesting. I think I would employ such methodology. I've never used it, but it seems really...
Well, it's not the methodology. It's more of a kind of a way of thinking.
I think you underestimate the thing you just described, because in fact, that's quite an indicator and a support tool for decision making as well. And I think one of the things that we didn't discuss, and I'm not sure whether we are prepared to, but it's the degree of change that happens when you realize you have to change your decision.
Mm-hmm.
Reconsider goals, change the choice that you've made, and because basically, is it always just a new choice? Like, let's say a car, yeah? Like you bought a car, you drove for 5 years, you choose the next car. But what should happen that you would change your car not in 5 years, but in 2 months? Is there something that, and it means, especially in work context, about people, yeah? Like you hire a person, and then like, how long do you actually stay with this person, even seeing that something is going wrong or something is not going according to your expectations? Your choice was not right.
Right. Well, that's an interesting topic. I think it is very interesting, and I sense like maybe not even a follow-up, like a follow-up that we have in the beginning of an episode, but I think it can be a full-fledged episode that is a follow-up to this topic to discuss precisely what you just described, how other facets of the decision-making process, like monitoring the outcomes and controlling whether the decision is still the best decision to go by, and also how to kind of put stuff around the decision-making process such that we can arrive at different kinds of decisions altogether,
and maybe
different,
we can
very vastly different solutions to problem.
I think we could add there also the syndrome of, after you announce the decision, of not being super responsible for holding it forever. Because, like, let's say today I think that OKR is the best goal setting system for Savvy, and it doesn't mean that it's always going to be the best goal setting system for Savvy. But after I've presented and talked about it, it kind of reinforced this confirmation bias in me that, all right, that's turning into sunk cost fallacy. But also it kind of builds up expectation from people that you are an follower or adept of this method, and builds expectation that if you start talking about something else, you're just provocative, or you're not really serious about this. Like you voted for Trump, it means you can never vote for Democrats again.
Yeah, like it feels like you are betraying something to people who supported you on that decision, and also to others. It might look, hey, is he wobbling? Like, why is he changing this decision after 3 years or something like that? Well, that's a deep topic. Like I said, it can be like another full episode with follow up to this. But this is not going to be the next episode, right? Because the next episode is going to be
a book club.
What's going to be?
And we are going to discuss a book by Peter Guber, Tell to Win. What's your progress on the book right now?
The weather is nice today, right?
Yeah. Right.
Well, not really nice. No, my progress is not great on the book, but it will be there.
I actually got a paperback copy from UK, and I think that our schedule and planning is impeccable, because if I can get a book from UK to Ukraine during the war, that's good enough to... So what I did, I listened to the book, and then I realized that I would like to review it in text, because it doesn't work just as an audio for me.
I think I have a Ukrainian translation of this book, but it's still in Ukraine. I didn't bring it over to UK with me, but I'm also listening to audiobook.
Well, I'm curious, because storytelling has been around me for quite a while, and I have a lot of side stories that I'll try not to tell while discussing the book.
All right, we'll see how we can manage that.
So the book club is the next one, and then a guest episode the one after next. And
Yep.
after all the spoilers, we can just wish our listeners have a good week.
Yep. Good 2 weeks, I guess.
Good weeks then.